I am live right now. Anyway, I just wanted to make this video because last night before I went to bed, I had a really fun thought that I think everybody would benefit from. It's a little bit of a polarizing thought because there's a lot of contradictory information out there, and that has to do with foam rolling your lower back. Should you do it or should you not do it? Now, the first thing I want to touch on is that all of the advice, if you will, that I give has to do from a performance optimization standpoint and an injury prevention standpoint. So since I am not a medical practitioner, if you have contradictory information from a medical professional for your specific situation, obviously go ahead and follow that advice. Now, that being said, I want to touch on why I said what I did and clarify a few things. And what I posted was that it is a myth that foam rolling your lower back is good for low back pain. And in most cases, this is true. And the reason why this is true is because if we look at your lower back from an anatomical perspective, it's not meant to move around very much. So let's do this. I'm going to share my screen real quick, see if it'll let me. Cool. So hopefully everybody can see my screen. And what I want to pull up here, there was an article written years ago by Mike Boyle based on a conversation he had with Gray Cook. And the article was called The Joint by Joint Approach. And so this is basically what we're looking at. And I just pulled it up on Google. But more or less, we see that when we look at the way that our body is set up, it's an alternating pattern of mobile joints and stable segments with joints in them. Now, if we take a look at, say, the lower back right here in the middle of the screen, it is considered a stable segment. It's called a stable segment because it's not meant to move around very much. And the movement that it's meant to have is only in one plane of motion, what we call flexion or extension. This is like going down and bending and touching your toes and standing back up and leaning backwards a little bit. The lower back is not meant to bend sideways or to twist. So here's what happens is a lot of us, we experience back pain, lower back pain in particular, especially for a golfer or an athlete. And so what do? We say, oh, well, I know that foam rolling releases my tissues and gets things to move around a little bit. I should do that on my lower back. But the question we should really be asking is, why is there lower back pain in the first place? And chances are good that the lower back pain is there because the mobile segments above and below the back are blocked. They're gunked up. They're restricted. So if we look above, where we see is the thoracic spine, this area of the spine that's inside of the rib cage. And this is a very mobile area. Not only can it move forward and backwards like the lower back, but it can also tilt side to side and it can twist. So this is really important. Now, the other thing to understand about this thoracic spine is while it can move forward and backwards, side to side and twist, really it can only do one at a time. So if it's already rounded forward, it's not going to be able to twist. And that's a whole other problem. Because sometimes, let's say you're a golfer, we try to ask our body, our thoracic spine, to twist. This is where the idea of shoulder turn comes from. Shoulder turn is not actually our shoulders turning, it's the thoracic spine twisting. Now, if we're stuck in a rounded position, such as behind a desk all day, and we decide, hey, I'm going to drive to the golf course and try to swing a club, we're going to be in trouble because we're stuck in this position. Now we can't twist. So what happens? The segment below our lower back, which isn't meant to move around very much, we're basically asking it, hey, I need you to twist. And what happens is we're asking it to move in a way that it's not meant to move, and that causes dysfunction in the system, and it causes a muscular imbalance and things to flare up, which we'll get to in a minute. But if we do certain exercises and mobility techniques to open up the chest and the shoulders so that we have proper posture in this thoracic spine, now the thoracic spine can rotate, and when it can rotate, the lower back can stay stable. And when the lower back can stay stable, it's doing its job, and we're not going to be foam rolling it because it's not going to be in pain. Again, we'll get to that in a second. The other segment that's really concerning is if we go below, we're looking at the hips, and the hips are very mobile ball and socket joints. They can move in all different directions, and they're massive power producers for our body. But again, if we're doing motions such as a golf swing or other athletic endeavors, whatever it might be, where the hips can't move, the lower back needs to try to take over. Now, the thing that we need to understand is that there is some information out there that says, okay, let's foam roll the QL muscles of the lower back. The quadratus lumborum, or the QL muscles, are these deep stabilizing muscles of the lower back, and they attach directly to the lower part of the spine. So a lot of times when we're feeling low back pain, the common information out there is, oh, my QL is tight, I need to loosen my QL. Now, the only reason that that information is out there is because really what we want to do is we want to balance the muscles and the stabilizing muscles of our backside with the muscles of our front side. Okay, and if they're in balance, our muscles aren't going to spasm, they're not going to lock up. Now, the question becomes, is the solution to loosen these QL muscles, or is it to strengthen the abdominals? And I think you know where we're headed with this. There's no need to loosen the QL because that destabilizes the lower back. And in the case of many of us, if our hips are already tight, if our chest is already tight, and then we loosen our lower back, it's just going to make the problem worse. So what happens is we get temporary relief when we foam roll our low back. These QL muscles become relaxed along with the other muscles in the back part of our body. Now they're in balance with our core, our front side, and now maybe the muscle spasms stop. We feel relief. We're like, oh, this feels so much better. Now I'm out of pain. But the pain's going to come back worse than it was before you started. And the reason for that is because now they're balanced, but you're unstable, and your lower back is very vulnerable. And this is going to leave you susceptible to injury and bulging discs and herniations and things of that nature. So we really need to stop lengthening these QL muscles. We need to strengthen our core and our abdominals. But there's a problem here. There is a biological response in our body. Sorry, I can't talk and at the same time. It's called reciprocal inhibition. You might not know what it means, but you know what it means. If we do a bicep curl, the bicep contracts and the tricep relaxes and it lengthens. When one muscle group works, the opposite muscle group turns off. Now here's the problem, is when we sit for prolonged periods of time, the front side of our hips, our hip flexors, they become very tight, very short. What that does is it turns our butt off in a process known as lower cross syndrome. We sit, our hip flexors become tight, and our butt turns off. When our butt is turned off, the glute muscles are no longer able to stabilize our pelvis and keep our body upright and to keep the lower back safe. So what happens is those lower back muscles, those QL muscles that we were just talking about, they become incredibly tight as well, which causes the front side, our abdominals, to turn off. And this, it feeds the cycle. Okay, so you see where I'm headed with this. So if we have low back pain, don't loosen the low back, strengthen the core. Well, how do we strengthen the core? We need to get the lower back to stop seizing. Well, how do we get it to stop seizing? We need to get the butt to turn back on. When we can get the butt to turn back on, we can loosen up our hip flexors. Now, if there's anything that we should be foam rolling for low back pain, it's our hip flexors. It's the thoracic spine, it's our chest, and it's our hip flexors, so that we can go from having this arched lower back and weak butt to turn the butt back on, resetting the pelvis, turn the hip flexors off, turn the core back on, and when the core is back on, these guys relax. So it's not that we need to physically relax the QL muscles, we need to activate the core so that they are stable. Now, yes, I know what a lot of you are thinking. My chiropractor told me to do this, my physiotherapist told me to do that. And again, like we started this video off with, there are going to be times where, based on your specific condition, you need to do things to your lower back to get it to move in the ways that it should move again. So we said the lower back, the lumbar spine, it's meant to move a little. It's meant to move forward and backward, we call flexion and extension. And if you're having problems where the spine literally can't move and the segments can't move, that's a problem, okay? And maybe you can use some kind of a device to loosen up the fascia and the connective tissue to get that spine moving, but just because it can move doesn't mean that's the solution, because we also need to stabilize it. And a lot of injury happens when things that aren't supposed to move start moving around. So yes, make sure it can move, but also make sure that you can control that movement, because if that movement is uncontrolled, you're in trouble. So the long roundabout thing that we're talking about here is, if you have lower back pain, you need to get to the root of why are you experiencing that low back pain in the first place. And chances are good you need to create more mobility or freedom of movement above and below that lower back, so that you can create stabilization in the lower back and in the core. And to create that stabilization, you need to get your abdominals on and stronger, so that your back and the front stabilize and are balanced. The thing that we want to understand about stabilizing the core is that exercises like crunches might make the abdominals stronger in isolation, but that's not how the core is meant to work. The core is meant to stabilize and keep things from moving. So doing exercises like deadlifts and farmer's carries and overhead squats and all sorts of exercises that try to make the core move but don't allow the core to move, those are true core strengthening exercises. And especially if you're a rotary athlete like a golfer, baseball, tennis, if you're a thrower, whatever it is, one of my favorite exercises is known as a Pallof press. You can look them up. They are amazing because it's true functional core stability in a rotary aspect, which is amazing because we don't want the core, the lower part of the back, to rotate. So we train it to not rotate. Okay, so the next time somebody says, oh, you have low back pain, foam roll your lower back, I would dismiss it. Go a couple steps farther. They have good intentions behind what they're saying, but you need to understand why. Again, if you have a medical practitioner telling you to do something otherwise because of your specific medical condition, obviously listen to that. But for the 95% of us who are just looking to wake up in the morning with less back pain, to get done playing around golf with less back pain, to be able to come home from sitting at a desk without that back pain, but you're not talking about an injury here, we're talking injury prevention or performance optimization, do what we just talked about. Foam roll your hips. Get your butt turned back on. Foam roll your chest. Open up your shoulders. Do core stability and strengthening exercises. Yes, it's okay for the lower back to move in flexion and extension, but you need to own that movement and you need to be able to control it. And if you loosen up the back without strengthening the core, without creating more mobility in the hips and the chest, you're only going to have temporary relief, and it's going to come back way worse than it was going in. So I appreciate you hanging in there through this rant. I get fired up on this stuff, but I want to make sure that you guys out there and gals have the best information possible so that you can make the best decision possible for your condition. So yes, grab a foam roller, but do the right things with it. I appreciate you tuning in. I'll be talking to you next time.